Welcome back for another deep dive, and today we're going to be tackling a medical mystery.
Ooh, exciting.
Yeah, right. It's of the OpenStax Microbiology textbook. You can find a link to it in the description below if you want to follow along. But we're going to be walking through a fictional case study, but it's going to be packed with real-world microbiology concepts.
Yeah, it's going to be kind of like we're medical detectives, you know?
Oh, like that?
Yeah, using clues and science and all that stuff to solve a puzzle.
I'm into it. Okay, so let's set the scene. Imagine a 15-month-old named Hannah on a summer trip to Gambia with her family.
Okay.
It starts as like a dream vacation,
Yeah.
you know? But it takes a turn when Hannah suddenly falls ill.
Yeah.
And we're not talking about like a simple sniffle or anything. Her symptoms are like downright strange.
Yeah, she's incredibly lethargic and fatigued, like just completely drained of energy, no energy whatsoever. And even more concerning is her confusion and irritability, especially when she's outside, in the sunlight.
Now, any parent knows that toddlers can be fussy.
Oh, absolutely.
This is beyond typical behavior.
Oh, yeah, for sure. And then on top of that, there are the physical signs. You've got like slow reflexes, a stiff neck, and vomiting. It's a collection of symptoms that immediately raises red flags for any medical professional.
So Hannah's parents, understandably worried, rush her to a local clinic. Thankfully, the doctor there recognizes these unusual symptoms as potentially pointing towards something much more serious, meningitis.
Yeah, meningitis is an infection that affects the cerebrospinal fluid. That's the fluid that surrounds your brain and spinal cord, and it causes inflammation of the meninges. Those are the protective membranes around the brain and spinal cord. There are different types of meningitis, but bacterial meningitis is particularly dangerous because it can be fatal.
Oh, wow.
And it can progress rapidly.
So this is a race against time.
Absolutely. Hannah's doctor recognizes the urgency of the situation and starts her on a broad-spectrum antibiotic called ceftriaxone right away.
Wow.
Even before any test results are back. Yeah, and this antibiotic is often effective against a particular bacteria called N. meningitidis, which is a common cause of bacterial meningitis.
It's fascinating to me that they would start treatment before even knowing for sure what they're dealing with.
Yeah, it's a calculated risk for sure. But in cases of suspected bacterial meningitis, that risk is often necessary.
I see.
Because the potential consequences of waiting for confirmation are just too high.
So while Hannah's on the antibiotics, I imagine they're still running tests to confirm the diagnosis.
Oh, you bet. Even with treatment underway, lab tests are critical for a few reasons. First, it helps confirm whether it actually is bacterial meningitis caused by N. meningitidis. Second, it could impact the treatment plan. And finally, it helps determine if others who came into close contact with Hannah need preventative measures like vaccination or antibiotics to prevent further spread.
Okay, so let's get into the nitty-gritty of those tests. What are we looking for to pinpoint the culprit behind Hannah's illness?
Well, they started with a Gram stain, which is a classic microbiology technique. This involves staining a sample of bacteria and viewing it under a microscope. In Hannah's case, the Gram stain revealed gram-negative diplococci, which are basically pairs of bean-shaped bacteria that don't retain a certain type of stain. And this finding is a hallmark of N. meningitidis.
So we're already seeing some clues pointing towards N. meningitidis. What comes next?
Next, they cultured the bacteria from Hannah's blood sample. This involves growing the bacteria on specialized nutrient-rich plates called blood agar and chocolate agar. The colonies that grew from Hannah's sample were gray and non-hemolytic, meaning they didn't break down red blood cells. These characteristics further pointed to N. meningitidis.
Wow, it's like building a case piece by piece. But hold on, you mentioned earlier that there's a DNA test for N. meningitidis. Wouldn't that be the most accurate way to identify the bacteria? Why not just do that instead of all these other tests?
That's a great question, and it highlights the realities of medical care in different parts of the world. While DNA testing is incredibly accurate, it requires specialized equipment and expertise that might not be readily available in every hospital, especially in developing countries.
So in this case, the clinic in Gambia might not have had the resources for DNA testing.
Exactly. And that's where the power of these biochemical tests really shines. They are incredibly valuable because they're cost-effective and provide a wealth of information.
So it's like a budget-friendly but still effective detective kit.
Yeah, exactly. And they use this detective kit to conduct a few more tests. They did an oxidase test, which checks for the presence of a specific enzyme. N. meningitidis is oxidase positive, meaning it produces that enzyme, and the test confirmed that.
Okay, so another piece of the puzzle falls into place. What other tests did they run?
They also looked at the bacteria's menu, so to speak, the specific sugars they can utilize as a food source. This is called a sugar utilization test. And meningitis can metabolize glucose and maltose, but not lactose or sucrose. And as you might have guessed, the bacteria from Hannah's sample showed that exact pattern.
Wow. The evidence is really stacking up against N. meningitis at this point, so it seems like they're well on their way to identifying the culprit.
Yes, and this leads us to some really interesting questions. For example, N. meningitis can sometimes live harmlessly in our respiratory systems.
Yeah.
So what makes it suddenly turn into a threat and cause infections like meningitis?
That is a great question. I'm definitely curious to hear more about that. And what about Hannah? Does she recover? Tell me there's a happy ending here.
Don't worry, we'll delve into Hannah's recovery and this whole mystery of N. meningitis more soon.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Can't wait.
So to answer your question about Hannah, yeah, there is good news. She does recover.
Yeah. That's a relief to hear. But you also mentioned that bacterial meningitis can have lasting effects.
Yeah, that's right. It can be a tricky disease. Some patients, experience brain damage, hearing loss, or seizures as a result of the infection.
Oh, wow. So even surviving the initial infection doesn't mean you're completely in the clear.
Unfortunately, no. That is the case sometimes. But thankfully for Hannah, after several weeks of recovery, she didn't show any lasting effects.
That's wonderful to hear. But I'm still stuck on that question that you brought up earlier. And meningitis can sometimes exist harmlessly in our respiratory systems. So what causes it to switch gears and become so dangerous?
That's a question that scientists are still working to fully understand. For some reason, in certain individuals and under certain circumstances, it can cross from the respiratory system into the bloodstream.
So it's hanging out in our throats, usually minding its own business. But then, bam, it decides to go rogue.
It's a pretty good analogy. And once it enters the bloodstream, it can then spread to other parts of the body, including the brain and spinal cord, leading to meningitis.
That's terrifying. And it makes understanding its metabolism even more important, right? If we can figure out what flips the switch, we might be able to find better ways to prevent and treat these infections.
Exactly. Now, thinking about prevention, you mentioned the meningitis belt in sub-Saharan Africa earlier.
Yeah, why is N. meningitis so much more common in that specific region?
Well, there are likely several contributing factors. The dry and dusty climate in the region might play a role in the bacteria's ability to spread.
Yeah, it's easy to imagine those dust particles carrying all sorts of microbes.
That's right. Overcrowding and certain living conditions can also increase the rate of transmission. And unfortunately, factors like lower immunity and nutritional status in the population can make people more susceptible to the infection.
So it's a complex interplay of environmental, social, and biological factors. But thankfully, we do have a vaccine against N. meningitis, don't we?
Yes, there is a vaccine that protects against several common strains of the bacteria. It's recommended for children around 11 or 12 years old with a booster shot at 16. It's also recommended for people living in close quarters like college dorms or military barracks where the risk of transmission is higher.
And I imagine travelers to the meningitis belt, especially during the dry season, should also consider getting vaccinated.
Absolutely. If you are planning a trip to the region, especially between December and June, talk to your doctor about getting the meningitis vaccine. It is always better to err on the side of caution.
This deep dive has really driven home the point that understanding microbial metabolism isn't just some abstract concept. It's crucial for diagnosing, treating, and preventing serious infections like meningitis. But I have to ask, what are the chances that Hannah's parents knew about this meningitis belt before their trip?
That's an excellent question, and it highlights the importance of raising awareness about these types of health risks, especially for travelers. It's easy to get caught up in the excitement of planning a trip and overlook potential health concerns.
Definitely. We've covered so much ground today, from Hannah's scary journey to the complexities of N. meningitis. But before we wrap up, I want to leave our listeners with one final thought-provoking question. If this tiny microbe can cause so much trouble, what other factors might contribute to disease outbreaks?
That's a question worth pondering. The world of microbes is vast and constantly evolving. As we learn more about how they interact with each other, with us, and with the environment, we can develop better strategies for protecting public health.
It's a constant game of cat and mouse, but thankfully we have brilliant minds working tirelessly to unravel these mysteries.
That's right. This case study, though fictional, emphasizes how important it is to stay informed and proactive about our health and the health of our communities.
Well said. And if you're interested in learning more about this fascinating world of microbes, remember to check out that OpenStax Microbiology textbook. The link is in the description. It's a fantastic resource for anyone who wants to dive deeper. So listeners, what stood out to you from this deep dive? What questions are swirling in your mind about N. meningitis, or the microbial world in general?
We always love hearing your thoughts. Your perspectives help us explore new avenues and learn right alongside you.
Thanks for joining us on this journey into the microscopic world. Until next time, stay curious and keep those brains buzzing.
You know what's fascinating is that this whole conversation really underscores the power of knowledge. The more we understand about these microbes, the better prepared we are to tackle the challenges they throw our way.
It's like having a secret weapon almost.
Right,
Yeah.
our arsenal against infectious diseases.
So listeners, what stood out to you from this deep dive? What questions are swirling in your mind about meningitis, or the microbial world in general?
Yeah, we always love hearing your thoughts. Your perspectives help us explore new avenues and learn right alongside you.
Thanks for joining us on this journey into the microscopic world. Until next time, stay curious and keep those brains buzzing.